Hello friends, please like and subscribe to the channel and enjoy the stories. Chapter 1. The Clockwork Carousel. In the heart of Larkspur, a small town caught in perpetual autumn, the air was thick with the scent of caramel apples and damp leaves. The annual fall fair had just begun, and the town square was transformed into a kaleidoscope of lights, laughter, and music. Among the dazzling attractions, the centerpiece was the Clockwork Carousel, a marvel of Victorian engineering, its intricately carved horses seemingly alive as they danced to a hauntingly beautiful melody. Eleanor Whitmore had never been one for crowds, but there was something magnetic about the carousel. She stood at the edge of the fair, her woolen scarf pulled tightly around her neck, as she watched the gilded machine whirl in mesmerizing circles. Her eyes, the color of dark honey, reflected the golden glow of the fairground lights. It wasn't the carousel's beauty that drew her, but the man who operated it. Isaac Thatcher was a mystery wrapped in the scent of oil and wood polish. With his neatly trimmed beard and suspenders, he looked like he had stepped out of a sepia-toned photograph. Eleanor had noticed him first the year before, his hands deftly adjusting gears and levers, as if he were conducting an orchestra. But it wasn't just his skill that intrigued her. It was the way he never seemed to look at anyone directly, as though the carousel and its mechanical heart were his entire world. Eleanor took a hesitant step closer, her boots crunching against the gravel path. The closer she got, the more she felt the pull of something she couldn't name. She joined the small queue of children and parents waiting for their turn and fumbled with her gloves as she rehearsed how she might speak to him. When her turn came, Isaac's eyes briefly met hers. They were a startling shade of green, like moss after rain, and for a moment Eleanor forgot how to breathe. 2 tickets, she managed to say, holding out the crumpled paper stubs. Isaac took them with a gloved hand, his touch lingering just a fraction too long. He gestured toward the horses, his lips curving into a faint smile. Eleanor chose a white horse with a golden mane and climbed aboard. As the carousel began to turn, she felt an inexplicable sense of calm, as though she were part of the machine's rhythm. The world outside blurred into streaks of amber and crimson, and for a few minutes she was weightless. When the ride ended, Eleanor dismounted reluctantly, her legs unsteady. She turned to thank Isaac, but he was already engrossed in adjusting a series of brass levers. Summoning her courage, she stepped closer. "Do you ever ride it yourself?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Isaac glanced up, surprised. "No," he said, his tone as smooth as the polished wood of the carousel. "It's not meant for me." The cryptic answer only deepened Eleanor's curiosity. "Why not?" Isaac hesitated, then leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Because it's not just a carousel." Eleanor's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Isaac straightened, his expression unreadable. "Come back tomorrow," he said, "after the fair closes." And just like that, he turned away, leaving Eleanor with more questions than answers. That night she lay in bed, unable to shake the memory of his words. When the clock struck midnight, she made her decision. Tomorrow, she would find out the truth. When Eleanor arrived the next evening, the fair was deserted. The lights of the Clockwork Carousel still glowed softly, casting long shadows across the empty square. Isaac was waiting for her, his silhouette framed by the carousel's ethereal light. "You came," he said, as though he had doubted she would. Eleanor nodded. "I need to know. What did you mean?" Isaac gestured for her to step closer. "This carousel doesn't just move in circles," he said. "It moves through time." Eleanor stared at him, her heart pounding. "That's impossible." Isaac smiled faintly. "So is falling in love with someone who doesn't belong in your world." Before Eleanor could respond, Isaac reached for the nearest lever. The carousel sprang to life, its haunting melody filling the air. As the horses began to move, Eleanor felt a strange pull, as though the air around her had thickened. The next thing she knew, she was no longer in Larkspur. The fairground was gone, replaced by cobblestone streets and gaslit lamps. She turned to Isaac, but he was already fading, his form dissolving like mist in the dawn. "You have until sunrise," his voice echoed faintly. "Find me where it all began." Eleanor's journey through this mysterious, unfamiliar world had just begun. Chapter 2. The Streets of Somewhere Else. The cobblestone streets beneath Eleanor's boots felt uneven and ancient, whispering of a time far removed from her own. Gas lamps flickered on wrought iron posts, their golden light casting elongated shadows on buildings that loomed with Gothic grandeur. The air smelled different, less of caramel apples and more of damp stone and burning coal. Eleanor pulled her scarf tighter, her heart pounding from more than just the chill. Isaac's parting words echoed in her mind. Find me where it all began. She had no idea where that might be, but standing still wouldn't get her any closer to answers. As she moved through the streets, Eleanor noticed that the people passing her wore elaborate clothes, tailored waistcoats, sweeping dresses, and hats adorned with feathers or flowers. No one seemed to notice her modern coat and boots, but their hurried steps and guarded expressions unsettled her. She rounded a corner and came upon a sprawling market square. Lanterns hung from strings crisscrossing above, and stalls overflowed with strange wares. Pocket watches with glowing faces, bottles of swirling liquid, and books whose titles seemed to shift when she tried to read them. "Looking for something, miss?" a voice rasped. Eleanor turned to see an elderly man sitting behind a stall, draped in crimson fabric. His eyes were sharp despite his age, and he gestured toward a collection of small brass trinkets. "I'm not sure," Eleanor admitted. "I'm trying to find someone." The man's gaze narrowed. "Someone, or something." She hesitated. "Someone. A man named Isaac." The old man's face twitched at the name. "Isaac Thatcher?" he asked, his voice a whisper. Eleanor nodded eagerly. "Yes. Do you know him?" The man leaned back, rubbing his chin. "He's not a name often spoken here. If you're looking for him, you'll need to visit the Hall of Kronos. But be warned, finding him isn't the same as keeping him." "What do you mean?" Eleanor asked, but the man only handed her a small brass compass. "This will guide you," he said, "but the path isn't without cost." Before she could ask more, the man gestured for her to leave. The compass in her hand felt warm, almost alive, and the needle spun wildly before settling on a direction. With a deep breath, Eleanor followed its lead. The Hall of Kronos stood at the edge of the city, a towering structure of black stone and glinting brass gears that seemed to pulse with an inner light. The doors were engraved with intricate patterns, each line weaving into the next like the threads of an impossible tapestry. Eleanor pushed them open, her footsteps echoing in the vast chamber beyond. The air hummed with energy, and the walls were lined with clocks. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, each ticking at a different rhythm. At the center of the hall stood a dais, and on it Isaac. "Eleanor," he said, his voice soft but clear. He looked different here, his usual calm replaced by an intensity that made her breath catch. "You disappeared," she said, her voice trembling. "What is this place? What's happening?" Isaac stepped closer, his green eyes searching hers. "This is where I belong, and where I've been waiting." "Waiting for what?" she asked. "For you." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Eleanor's heart raced, but before she could respond, the chamber trembled. The clocks lining the walls began to tick faster, their rhythms clashing in a cacophony that made her ears ring. Isaac's expression darkened. "We're out of time." "What do you mean?" Eleanor asked, panic rising. "This isn't just a reunion," he said. "It's a choice. The carousel isn't just a way to move through time. It's a tether. If you stay with me, you'll have to leave everything behind. Your world, your life, everything." Eleanor stared at him, her mind racing. She had followed him into the unknown, but the weight of what he was asking pressed down on her. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "I couldn't," Isaac said. "You had to see it for yourself, to understand." The clock's ticking grew louder, the air in the chamber thick with urgency. Eleanor looked at the compass in her hand, its needle spinning wildly once more. "Eleanor," Isaac said, his voice almost drowned out by the noise. "Whatever you decide, know that I'll always be waiting." Tears pricked her eyes as she stepped closer. "What happens if I don't stay?" "You'll return to your world," he said, "and I'll remain here, a memory fading with time." The decision tore at her heart. She had only just begun to understand the depth of what she felt for him, and now she was faced with an impossible choice. As the chamber shook violently, Eleanor made her decision. She stepped forward, but instead of taking Isaac's hand, she pressed the compass into his palm. "Find me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "No matter where, no matter when." Before Isaac could respond, the world around her fractured into light and shadow. When she opened her eyes, she was back in Larkspur, standing by the now silent clockwork carousel. The fairground was deserted, and the air was still. But in her hand, she held a small brass trinket, one that ticked softly, keeping time with her heartbeat. And she knew the story was far from over. Chapter 3: The Ticking Connection. Eleanor stood beside the dormant clockwork carousel, the brass trinket warm in her hand. The fairground around her was eerily silent, as though the world itself held its breath. She turned the trinket over, studying the intricate gears and tiny symbols etched into its surface. The ticking sound was faint but steady, a rhythm that seemed to echo her heartbeat. Isaac's parting words lingered in her mind. "Find me where it all began." But she was back where she'd started, and Isaac was nowhere to be found. Frustration bubbled within her, but she knew one thing. This wasn't the end. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky in soft oranges and pinks, Eleanor felt a strange pull toward the carousel. The golden horses, now still and silent, seemed to watch her, their glass eyes glinting in the growing light. She approached cautiously, the trinket's ticking growing louder with each step. The lever Isaac had used to send her through time was still in place. Tentatively, she reached for it, her fingers trembling. Before she could touch it, the trinket in her hand began to hum. Startled, she dropped it, and it clattered to the ground, spinning wildly before coming to a stop. The carousel groaned to life. Lights flickered along its edges, and the haunting melody she had heard before began to play. Eleanor's heart raced as the golden horses shimmered, their surfaces rippling like liquid gold. One of the horses, her white steed with the golden mane, nudged forward, its head bowing slightly as though inviting her to climb aboard. Eleanor hesitated. The last time she'd ridden the carousel, it had taken her far from everything she knew, but the memory of Isaac's green eyes and the promise she had made to him spurred her on. She climbed onto the horse, gripping the polished brass pole tightly. As the carousel began to spin, the world blurred again, colors and shapes melting into streaks of light. The melody grew louder, and Eleanor felt the now familiar sensation of weightlessness. When the spinning stopped, the air was cool and damp, filled with the scent of earth and rain. Eleanor opened her eyes to find herself in a dense forest, the trees towering above her like ancient sentinels. The carousel was gone, leaving only a faint circle of disturbed leaves where it had stood. The trinket in her hand ticked rapidly, its needle pointing deeper into the forest. Eleanor followed it, pushing through thick underbrush and stepping over moss-covered roots. The forest seemed alive, the wind whispering through the leaves like a voice just out of reach. After what felt like hours, she emerged into a clearing. At its center stood an ancient stone archway, half covered in ivy. Symbols similar to those on the trinket were carved into the arch, glowing faintly in the twilight. Isaac was there, standing beneath the arch. His back was to her, and he seemed to be studying the symbols. "Isaac," Eleanor called, her voice breaking the stillness. He turned, his eyes widening in surprise. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the distance between them filled with unspoken words. "You came back," he said, his voice soft. "You said you'd wait," she replied, stepping closer. "But you didn't have to wait alone." Isaac's expression was conflicted. "This place, it's the origin of everything. The carousel, the time threads, it all starts here. But it's also a crossroads. Once we step through that arch, there's no going back." Eleanor glanced at the glowing symbols. "And if we don't? The carousel will stop working," Isaac said. "Time will seal itself, and we'll be trapped in separate worlds, forever." Her chest tightened at the thought. She had already lost him once. She couldn't bear to lose him again. "Then we go together," she said firmly. Isaac hesitated, his green eyes searching hers. "You're sure? This isn't just about love, Eleanor. It's about leaving behind everything, your world, your past. Are you ready for that?" Eleanor took his hand, the warmth of his touch grounding her. "I wasn't ready before, but I am now, because if time has taught me anything, it's that moments don't wait, and neither should we." Isaac's expression softened, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. Together they stepped toward the archway, the glow of the symbols intensifying as they approached. As they crossed the threshold, a rush of light enveloped them, and the world shifted once more. When the light faded, they found themselves in a place unlike any they had ever seen, a realm of infinite skies and floating islands, where time itself seemed to flow like a river through the air. Clocks of all shapes and sizes floated around them, their hands moving in impossible patterns. Isaac looked at Eleanor, wonder and relief in his eyes. "This is it," he said. "The heart of time." Eleanor squeezed his hand, her fear replaced by a sense of awe. They had crossed the boundary between worlds, not just for love, but for something greater, a shared destiny. As they stood together in this strange, timeless place, Eleanor knew their journey was far from over. But for the first time, she felt certain they would face whatever came next, together. And somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of the carousel's melody played on, a reminder of the moments that had brought them here. Chapter 4: The Clockwork Symphony. The timeless realm was unlike anything Eleanor could have imagined. The air shimmered with an iridescent glow, and faint echoes of laughter, whispers, and music seemed to ripple through the vast expanse. Floating islands drifted lazily in an endless sky, connected by thin, golden threads that glinted in the light. Gears of various sizes hovered and rotated in perfect harmony, each turning in time with the melodic hum that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere. Eleanor and Isaac stood at the edge of their floating platform, holding hands. The archway they had passed through had disappeared, leaving no path to return. "What is this place?" Eleanor whispered. Isaac gazed at their surroundings, his expression a mix of awe and recognition. "This is the core. It's where all time threads converge and diverge. It's the source of the carousel's power, and the heart of everything." As he spoke, a clock the size of a cathedral drifted past, its hands moving both forward and backward. Its face displayed not just hours and minutes, but entire moments, fragments of lives and stories playing out like scenes from a dream. Eleanor caught glimpses of children laughing, a storm battering a ship, and a pair of lovers embracing under a starry sky. "Every thread," Isaac continued, gesturing toward the golden strands that connected the floating islands. "Every choice, every possibility. It's all woven here. This place keeps it all in balance." Eleanor's grip on his hand tightened. "And now we're part of it." Isaac nodded, his expression serious. "But being here means we're not just observers. We have a role to play." As if in response to his words, a figure emerged from the shifting light, a woman cloaked in shimmering fabric that seemed to ripple like water. Her face was ageless, her eyes deep pools of silver. "Welcome, travelers," she said, her voice melodic yet commanding. "You have crossed the boundary between time and eternity. Few are chosen to enter this realm, and fewer still are allowed to stay." "Who are you?" Eleanor asked, her voice steady despite the surreal circumstances. "I am the Keeper," the woman replied, "guardian of the core and guide to those who enter it. You have come seeking answers, but the journey you began was not just for love, it was for purpose." Eleanor exchanged a glance with Isaac. "What purpose?" The Keeper raised a hand, and a cascade of golden light surrounded them. Within the glow, scenes began to unfold, the clockwork carousel being built in a workshop lit by flickering gas lamps. Isaac, as a boy, watching his father carefully etch symbols onto the carousel's horses, and Eleanor, years later, drawn to the carousel as though by an invisible force. "This has been in motion for centuries," the Keeper said. "The carousel was created as a bridge, a way to mend the fractures in time. But it cannot function without its guardians. That is why you were brought together. Your bond, your choices, they have woven a thread strong enough to restore balance." Isaac frowned. "Restore balance? Is the core broken?" The Keeper's expression darkened. "Not yet, but it is unraveling. Strands of time have begun to fray, and if they are not mended, the entire tapestry will collapse." Eleanor's heart sank. "And you want us to fix it?" "You were chosen," the Keeper said simply. "But the choice remains yours. To take on this role means sacrificing what you once were. You will become part of the core, its stewards and protectors, tied to it for as long as it exists." Eleanor's mind raced. She thought of the life she had left behind, the quiet streets of Larkspur, the warmth of her favorite bookshop, the friends and family she might never see again. But she also thought of Isaac, of the connection that had pulled them together against all odds. Isaac turned to her, his green eyes steady. "Eleanor, whatever you decide, I'll follow you. But this, This is something bigger than us. Her chest tightened at the weight of his words. She looked at the keeper. What happens if we say no? The carousel will stop, the keeper said. Time will become rigid, unable to adapt or heal, and eventually it will shatter. Eleanor felt Isaac's hand slip into hers, grounding her. She took a deep breath. What do we need to do? The keeper smiled faintly, her silver eyes gleaming. Step forward. The platform beneath their feet shifted, carrying them to the center of the core. There, a massive golden loom stood, its threads stretching out into infinity. Each thread pulsed with light, some steady and bright, others dim and flickering. This is the tapestry of time, the keeper said. You must repair the broken strands. To do so, you must enter the threads and mend the fractures within. Enter them? Eleanor asked, glancing at Isaac. The keeper nodded. Each thread is a moment, a choice, a possibility. You will relive them, change them, or stabilize them as needed. But be warned, the deeper you go, the harder it will be to return. Isaac stepped forward, his jaw set. We'll do it. Together. Eleanor followed, her resolve hardening. They had come this far. There was no turning back now. The keeper extended her hands, and a golden thread unraveled from the loom, its light flickering like a candle in the wind. This is your first task, she said, a fracture born of regret. Mend it, and the core will begin to heal. As the thread wrapped around them, Eleanor felt a pull stronger than anything she had experienced before. The world dissolved into light, and they were swept into the thread's story, a fragment of time that awaited their touch. Their journey as guardians of the Clockwork Symphony had begun. Chapter 5. Within the Thread. The golden thread pulled Eleanor and Isaac into its depths, unraveling the world around them. The light intensified, then softened, reshaping itself into a vivid scene. They found themselves standing in a cobbled street, bathed in the amber glow of gas lamps. The scent of rain-soaked earth and the distant sound of a violin lingered in the air. The world felt real, more tangible than anything Eleanor had experienced in the core. But something was off. A sense of tension hummed just beneath the surface, like a dissonant note in a symphony. Where are we? Eleanor asked, turning to Isaac. He scanned their surroundings, his expression thoughtful. It feels familiar, like a memory, but not mine. Ahead, a small shop caught Eleanor's eye. Its window was filled with mechanical wonders, miniature automatons, clocks with intricate moving parts, and a brass carousel that looked eerily similar to the one back in Larkspur. A sign above the door read, E. Thatcher, Clockmaker. Isaac, Eleanor whispered, pointing to the sign. His breath caught. That's my father's name. Before they could step closer, the golden thread shimmered around them, and the air seemed to ripple. A woman emerged from the shop, her expression a mixture of determination and sorrow. She carried a bundle wrapped in cloth. And though she moved quickly, her every step seemed weighed down by regret. That's the fracture, Isaac said, his voice steady but tense. Whatever she's about to do, it's the moment we need to fix. Eleanor nodded, and they followed the woman through the dimly lit streets. She stopped at the edge of a canal, her figure silhouetted against the water. With trembling hands, she unwrapped the bundle, revealing a small mechanical device, a pocket watch unlike any Eleanor had ever seen. Its face glowed faintly, and its gears turned with an otherworldly precision. She's going to throw it in, Eleanor realized, her stomach twisting. Isaac stepped forward, his voice firm. Wait! The woman froze, startled by his sudden presence. She turned, clutching the watch tightly. Her face was pale, her eyes red from tears. Who are you? It doesn't matter, Isaac said, taking a cautious step closer. But I know that whatever you're about to do, it's not what you truly want. Her grip on the watch tightened. You don't understand. This thing, it's cursed. It's ruined everything. Eleanor spoke softly, her voice gentle. Maybe it's not the watch that's the problem. Maybe it's the regret you're carrying. The woman's gaze flickered between them. Uncertainty etched across her face. It was supposed to fix things, she whispered, to bring back the time I lost. But it only made things worse. My husband, my son. I thought I could change the past, but I couldn't. Isaac's eyes softened. You can't rewrite what's already written, but you can choose what happens next. Holding on to regret will only chain you to it forever. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at the watch. Its glow seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. What do I do then? Let it go, Eleanor said, stepping closer. Not into the canal, into someone's hands who can use it for good. Let it be part of something new. The woman hesitated, her fingers trembling as she held the watch out to Isaac. Take it, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Do what I couldn't. Isaac accepted the watch, its warmth spreading through his palm. As he did, the air shimmered, and the golden thread pulsed with light. The tension in the scene dissolved, replaced by a profound stillness. The woman smiled faintly, her expression one of peace. Thank you, she said, her figure beginning to fade, for giving me a second chance. The street dissolved around them, and Eleanor and Isaac were pulled back into the core. The golden thread returned to the loom, its light now steady and strong. The keeper stood waiting, her silver eyes gleaming with approval. You have done well, she said. The first fracture is mended, but there are many more. Isaac looked down at the pocket watch in his hand, its glow now faint but steady. What about this? It is a relic of time, the keeper said. A fragment of the tapestry. It will guide you as you continue your journey. Eleanor glanced at Isaac, her resolve strengthening. What's the next thread? The keeper gestured to the loom, where another thread unraveled, its light flickering like a distant star. This one is woven with despair, but within it lies the seed of hope. Go now and remember, each thread you mend brings the core closer to balance. As the new thread wrapped around them, Eleanor felt a sense of purpose unlike anything she had ever known. This was more than a mission. It was their destiny. Hand in hand, she and Isaac plunged into the next story, ready to face whatever awaited them. Chapter 6, The Final Thread. The golden thread pulled Eleanor and Isaac into a swirling void, darker and more chaotic than anything they had encountered before. The air was heavy, as though it carried the weight of centuries of pain and longing. This thread felt different, volatile, urgent. When the world reformed around them, they stood in a vast, empty field beneath a blood-red sky. The ground was cracked and barren, the only sound the low, mournful howl of the wind. In the distance, a lone figure sat on a stone, their shoulders slumped in despair. Eleanor instinctively tightened her grip on Isaac's hand. This doesn't feel like the others, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's the end of something, Isaac replied, his green eyes scanning the desolate landscape. Or maybe the beginning. The figure on the stone lifted their head slightly, as though sensing their presence. Eleanor and Isaac approached cautiously, the barren earth crunching beneath their feet. The figure turned, and Eleanor's breath caught. It was her. Or rather, a version of her, older, weathered, and hollow-eyed. This version of herself seemed to carry the weight of countless lifetimes, her expression etched with a pain that felt both alien and achingly familiar. You came, the older Eleanor said, her voice low and cracked. Isaac looked between them, his brow furrowed. Who are you? The older Eleanor chuckled bitterly. You don't recognize me, Isaac. I'm what she becomes, she said, nodding toward the younger Eleanor. If this fracture isn't mended. Eleanor's stomach twisted. I don't understand. The older version of herself rose, her movements slow and deliberate. This is what happens when the core fails, when the fractures go unmended. Time collapses and everything becomes this. She gestured to the desolate field around them. I've lived it over and over, trying to fix it, but I always end up here, alone. Isaac stepped forward, his jaw set. But you're not alone this time. We're here. The older Eleanor's gaze softened, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. That's why the core brought you, to do what I couldn't, to break the cycle. Eleanor's heart raced as she processed the weight of the moment. How? How do we stop this? The older Eleanor pointed to the sky, where a massive, shattered clock loomed. Its gears hung in midair, frozen and broken, and its hands spun wildly. That clock is the heart of this thread. It's the source of the fracture. If you can fix it, you'll save the core, and yourselves. But how do we fix something so broken? Isaac asked, his voice steady but laced with urgency. The older Eleanor reached into her tattered cloak and pulled out a small shard of glowing crystal. This, she said, it's the last fragment of the core's essence. You'll need to place it in the clock, but be warned, it requires a sacrifice. Eleanor and Isaac exchanged a glance. What kind of sacrifice? Eleanor asked. The older Eleanor hesitated, her expression pained. One of you must stay behind. The core demands man's balance, and restoring it means anchoring part of yourself to the tapestry forever. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Isaac broke the silence. Then I'll do it. Eleanor's eyes widened. No, Isaac, you can't. Yes, I can, he said firmly, his green eyes locking onto hers. You've always been the heart of this journey, Eleanor. I was just the spark. You're the one who can carry it forward. Tears blurred her vision as she shook her head. I can't lose you. You're not losing me, he said, his voice softening. I'll still be here, in every moment you mend, in every thread you weave. The older Eleanor stepped closer, placing the shard in Isaac's hand. You're braver than I ever was, she said quietly. Isaac turned to Eleanor, his expression full of love and resolve. This is how we win, Eleanor. Together. Eleanor nodded, though her heart felt like it was breaking. Together, she whispered. The ascent to the shattered clock was grueling. The winds howled, and the ground trembled with every step. As they reached the base of the clock, its massive gears groaned, and the air crackled with raw energy. Isaac stepped forward, holding the glowing shard aloft. The clock seemed to respond, its broken pieces vibrating as though yearning to be whole again. Now, the older Eleanor said, her voice carrying over the chaos. Isaac placed the shard into the heart of the clock. Light erupted, blinding and all-encompassing. The gears roared to life, spinning and clicking into place. The hands of the clock stilled, then began to move in perfect harmony. As the light faded, Eleanor turned to find Isaac standing at the base of the clock, his figure glowing faintly. His body began to dissolve into threads of light, weaving themselves into the tapestry that stretched across the sky. No, Eleanor cried, reaching for him. He smiled, his expression serene. You've got this, he said softly. Remember, time isn't just moments, it's us. And then he was gone, his light melding into the core. The barren field transformed, grass and flowers springing to life. The red sky softened into a radiant blue, and the hum of harmony returned to the air. The core was mended, and the fractures were healed. Eleanor stood alone beneath the now whole clock, her heart aching but full of purpose. She looked up at the sky, where the threads of time stretched endlessly. She could feel Isaac's presence in every thread, his sacrifice woven into the very fabric of existence. The keeper appeared beside her, her expression gentle. You've restored the balance, Eleanor. The core is whole again, thanks to both of you. Eleanor nodded, wiping her tears. What happens now? You continue, the keeper said, as a steward of time. But you won't be alone. He's with you, in every moment, every choice, every heartbeat. Eleanor looked at the sky one last time, the faint sound of the clockwork carousel's melody echoing in the distance. She took a deep breath, her resolve solidified. Let's begin. And with that, Eleanor stepped forward, ready to weave the next chapter of the tapestry.